shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Hi everybody, it's me, the Vantage, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there's Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Aloha everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I am your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin, and today we are going to interview Glenn Steckling, and we're also going to have Karen Christine Patrick on our panel. Glenn Steckling is currently the director of the half-century-old George Adamski Foundation, which is one of the oldest, most enduring UFO organizations that represents George's 50-plus years of family history and experiences concerning the UFO phenomena. This history includes their official activism in Europe and Washington, D.C. throughout the 60s, their pioneering moon anomaly research from the 70s and 80s, and worldwide media events since Mr. Steckling's father, former Director Fred Steckling, and his family were close friends and selected co-workers of George Adamski, who was considered by many to be the pioneer in the early UFO contactee field. Fred Steckling's first book, Why Are They Here? Spaceships from Other Worlds, was published by Vantage in 1969, remains a classic in the field and discusses his interaction with the Adamski space contacts. His second book, which was from 1981, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon, was one of the first in lunar anomaly investigation and was revised and expanded into Part 2 by Glenn in 1997, and it's now well into its 12th publication. Due to the close association with Adamski and materials directly inherited from Adamski, the late Fred Steckling was adamantly involved in ufology throughout the 1960s to the remainder of his lifetime. One of the historical originals in this field, he was invited by Dr. Lohman to address a panel of 22 scientists at NASA's Goddard Space Center, and to brief. One second here. Colonel Friedman and his staff at the Pentagon, who called the Adamski movies some of the best he had seen in civilian hands. His appearances included Life with Linkletter, Voice of America, National TV in Japan and Germany, a 1984 address before a selected committee of Britain's House of Lords, sponsored by Lord Clancarty, including numerable worldwide lectures and media events related to this subject till his passing. Glenn's mother, who continues to work at the foundation, and a coworker, Madeline Rotifer, testified before the Senate Space Committee. One more thing I want to read here, and then we're going to bring on, well, it's a very long bio. Maybe I'll just call it quits right here. You can go on my website, aquarianradio.com, to get the full bio. We have a lot of pictures there, and we'll probably add more as we get them. But before I bring on Glenn, Dr. Les and Sasha's been reading his book all day. What would you like to say before we bring on Glenn?
Okay, listen up, because, disclosure has already happened. And Glenn's book, The Alien Bases on the Moon 2, totally sums up irrefutable evidence and pictures that were taken before there was Photoshop and all that sort of stuff. This is it. We have a clandestine admiralty that's in space. We cooperate with aliens on Mars and the moon. There's an atmosphere. There's vegetation on the moon. There's domes all over it. And this is the guy that's going to tell you all about it, and about Adamski, who made it available to us from the get-go.
Glenn, welcome to our show. Thank you so much for coming today.
Well, thank you for having me. Aloha to all my friends and associates out there in the Hawaiian Islands. And I've had the opportunity to spend some time there, a great deal of time. And my father was on the air in the 1980s there in Hawaii and had call-in with many different descriptions of craft from the out islands. And then also I had an opportunity to get invited by one of the photographers of the Haleakala Observatory, and then my mother and I went up there in 1996 after we got DOD clearance and received a tour of that facility. And it's an interesting letter because he says we have photographs of what we call IFOs, identified flying objects, and UFOs as well. So out there, the Hawaiian Islands and the Pacific Rim has a very intricate history of association to these type of crafts and their visitors.
I heard that the Haleakala is part of the Star Wars what do you call it? Array of equipment.
Yeah, it has lasers.
That the late great Ronald Reagan was behind backing to get. Did they indicate anything about that when you did your tour?
No, we just dealt with them on the terms of their invitation and a little sit-down talk, and with the gentleman that invited us up, and as far as whatever they may or may not be doing in association to the military, because it is their facility, it is a military facility. There's a huge amount of research and data that legitimately goes on as well. Yes, you do have laser measurements going on between the Earth and the Moon. You have reflectivity and bounce back in order to assess the general geophysical situation regarding this planet. So there's a great deal of true science going on in relationship to what benefits us on this world as well.
Excellent. So the big question for our listeners, I'm not sure that they know who George Adamski is and why he's so important, and we need to know how you got involved with him. So let's start with a little background. Who is George Adamski, and what makes him so important?
Well, George was considered one of the pioneers in the UFO field, one of the original contactees that went public with verifiable circumstances and photographs and motion picture films dating back to the early 1950s, 1950 to be specific. And some of the pictures that you show there on your collage, which I've included there, of saucer formations in front of the moon, those are Adamski photos. They will correlate with later NASA photos as well that come from their microfiche archives. And so George was able to take a lot of these photographs through his 6 and 15-inch telescope, but he was more well known for his face-to-face encounter with one of these craft's pilots that landed in Desert Center, and in 1952 on November 20th, in fact. We just passed a few days past that anniversary-wise. And they were also verified by in Project Blue Book by a naval aviator on training exercise who reported one of these crafts over the general vicinity of Desert Center at exactly the same time and place that George Adamski was there. So he, along with the other 6 witnesses, were then on the newspapers, and both in the California and Arizona newspapers, and a collection of the photographs that later transpired into further experiences for George, where he went on board these crafts. And he always described the other people that were on there. He was never alone. Some of them were well-known people from our own society, which we interacted and exchanged information. So George went into orbit, described conditions in space, the Firefly effect about 10 years before John Glenn did. And he talked about the radiation belts that was several years before Van Allen radiation belts became known as that. And then did some travels around the moon as well, describing water, which we now can confirm, some vegetation, some areas of crater atmospheric compression, and things like that. So George, for the remainder of his life, was very active in this field. And our association began with him in 1963. My family had come out of the war in Europe and had noted a number of these crafts and sightings. My father used to track them on a large map. Then when we immigrated to this country, we had sightings both in Colorado and downtown Washington, D.C. in 1963. And I have that article as well from March of 63 in the Washington Daily News. And so my father then saw these craft along with about 30 other witnesses and the newspaper reporter for the Washington Daily News. And he went to the Library of Congress and started in the factual section, not fiction, not science fiction, but fact. A for Adamski, Flying Saucers Have Landed, the first book with Sir Desmond Leslie. And in there were photographs of the same type of craft we had seen. So my father wrote to Adamski out here in California. He was coming to Washington to lecture to the Air Force Reserves in a few months in the summertime. And we met him and became fast friends and practically lived together with him whenever he came back out to the East Coast. My family, along with Mrs. Rutherford, arranging newspaper and press conferences and various events. So we were very closely tied together, and we eventually became inheritors of the materials in the foundation.
Wow.
From George.
Can I ask you a couple questions here, and then we'll continue? What kind of beings did George interact with? Were they, greys, reptoids, humanoids, mantis, or something?
He was very adamant about the type of contacts he had. He had contacts with regular human beings that reside in this solar system and others, and that the human genome is the norm rather than the exception. And I think that if we take a little snapshot of science, we will find that to be a truism. If you look at Dr. Panampura's research in the biochemistry laboratory of the University of Maryland, and he just recently passed away, but he published several books, and he was very outspoken, and he said, listen, people, the elements of life surround our planet. Space is literally the womb of creation. RNA, DNA, all the essential molecules, water, hydrogen, nitrogen, everything that composes organic life bombards us daily to the tune of 2 tons a day. So we are getting the exposure to the creation of life from space each and every day. And this not only surrounds us, but surrounds every other planet in the cosmos and trails behind us like a wake of a ship as we go through space along with Mars and everybody else. That's how we end up with a meteorite from Mars in the Antarctica and vice versa. So we are trading organic compound and synthesis all the time. And this concludes that the human genome and the evolution of human beings is thus a universal manifestation. And George had direct contact with human beings from other planets.
Okay, so they were human beings. In your cosmology that George presented to you, did he ever talk about the Anunnaki, the Greys, the reptiles, the mantis? So
very large.
No, what we did is we talked. He talked about, and there are other people who have talked about this as well. and whether or not the listener or reader wants to debate the number of species or what have you, there are several different takes on all of this. One of the takes is that there are 4 different classifications: human, humanoid, robotics, and android. And oftentimes in the recovery of the crafts of some of these crafts that have malfunctioned, because everything is mechanical and nothing lasts forever, these crafts have malfunctioned, and they have found robotics and they have found android along with the remains of the human occupants as well. So that's what George talked about. That's what the scientists at NASA talked about. That's what the military people talk about. So I think that there's a huge discrepancy in this particular field between what comes out of the, shall we say, scientific background and organization and what filters around in the UFO field itself. And so I think still today, those in the UFO field are still charged with the responsibility of verifying what they talk about. And I've been around in this business a long time. My whole life, I can remember speakers who have come and gone, and experts that were non-experts, and back and forth. There's really no such thing as an expert anyway. And so, does it really matter? I mean, in effect, the fact that we have intelligent life that travels past our planet, and personally, if I travel past here and I took a little snapshot of what's going on and how people are living, I just keep going right on by. But for those who decide to drop in and interact with us, then it's important the nature and progression of that interaction, the benefit of that interaction, and the fact that we give them a little bit of, shall we say, credit, because to travel space takes thousands of years of technology. This is not beam me up, Scotty. This is not warp speed. When you go into space, you're surrounded in a 3-dimensional star field. For instance, you go to Saturn or even past the moon, and you look back at the Earth, and it's a little flicker of light, in which you're surrounded entirely by flicker of lights, and you're surrounded by magnetic storms and many different type of space anomalies. This is not for the shall we say, ignorant. You have to know what you're doing, and it takes many thousands of years to get there successfully. And I think we need to give them a little bit of credit and not paint them as monsters, because that doesn't, for the lack of any other expression, that just doesn't jive.
So what boons did they confer on, what did they give us?
Well, that seems to be a familiar Earth concept. What did I get from this? And this is basically works like this. They have come, and they do not solve our problems for us. We have created these problems, and the solutions have to be embraced in a way that we are cognizant and familiar with them. So the solutions come from within, not from out. And what they do is they give us a bit of inclination, a little pointing of the right direction, a little bit of spark of recognition in order to point us in the direction that may be of help. But that is still our own cognizant decision whether we choose to accept that or not. And if we don't, that's certainly no skin off their back.
Well, they gave us the anti-grav craft, or the total, the secrets.
Well, the system is actually pro-gravity. There's not anti-anything, not anti-gravity and not anti-matter. It's pro-gravity, and the explanation is very simple. The planet produces hundreds of trillions of watts of electricity, or a gigantic Van de Graaff generator, much like the Tesla experiment. And so you produce such an unbelievable amount of energy. In order to ante that, you would have to produce equal energy to completely offset it, to bring it to a neutral, and then double it once again in order to get somewhere on the other side of the anti or the negative field. Whereas pro-gravity allows you to blend with the energy and with the propulsion that goes between planets. And this allows you to travel on the lanes of space, on the magnetic lines, which travel at twice the speed of light. And you have now blended with nature's frequency and work together in order to use a successful propulsion system. And this is what they use. They use crafts that are designed around the propulsion and not the other way around. In our particular research and development, we have triangular craft, that's ours. We got ones with legs, that's ours. About 65-70% of what people see today is all our research and development stuff from the various governments and military organizations around the planet. So over time, in the 50s, it was much larger. It was more like 60% from space and 40% ours, and that ratio has changed now simply due to our technology. But their craft are designed in such a way that the magnetic force slides around it. So you have saucer craft. You don't have appendages. That gets torn off at the speed of light or more. You have cigar-shaped crafts, but also allows the field, as you look in those pictures, to expand itself. The faster it goes, the larger the field around the craft. So in order to protect it from cosmic dust and everything else that's out in space at these type of velocities. So what I try to do is I try to remind people of the science and the realism behind this subject, because I've lived it. I've lived through a time, and my parents have worked through a time when they went to NASA before 22 scientists, and the scientists already knew, oh yeah, we know how it works. They discussed the propulsion system. They discussed where the people who were inside it came from. They knew all of that. They were much more interested in the use of telepathy as a background system for emergency communications with the space program, and they were much more interested in how many human beings from other planets were working and living amongst us. So the reality of this field versus the tangent of this field has become quite different.
I have a few questions. Okay, I want to go back and kind of flesh this out a little bit more. So you're saying there were 4 different types: human, humanoid, robotics, and android.
Correct.
Now, what about Billy Meyer's Pleiadians or Bajorans?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Mr. Meyer. I think he has to speak for himself. The only thing I will say that I know the people that work for him, and they keep making the statement that there are no other contacts with anybody else other than just them, and they make such definitive hardline statements that I will leave that to the listener and to the reader to decide if that constitutes any plausible type of explanation.
Yeah, I don't think that that's true, that there's no other contact. I'm just, they are humanoid or human type of beings, so I just wondered if that fits in with
well, let me put it to you this way. Several years ago, I was very lucky to be included in a little symposium out in the Southwest with a number of retired gentlemen from Los Alamos and other projects around there. And we had a little conversation, we showed the films, and we talked about a variety of subjects of things that are going around in the world. And this one particular doctor looks at me and says, it makes absolutely sense that you have human visitors, because we give absolutely no credit to the composition of the human form. He says, if you look at a crayfish, or if you look at a reptilian, or if you look at any type of these other descriptions, they do not have the appendages that are necessary to build microcomputers or the machines to make microcomputers, to develop space technology, and so on and so forth. And so while we look at the evolution of species on our own planet, we do have to take some of that in credence as far as what we are hearing versus what the reality of it is. As Dr. Panampura said, don't be surprised when you land on another planet that somebody walks up to shake your hand, and that we have given this huge love affair with science fiction and sci-fi, that we must envision everything that comes from space as a scene from a Star Wars bar scene. and that does us a great deal of I would say, harm, because what it does is it prevents us from focusing on what we really need to focus on in order to bring this planet forward, and to allow that information for everyone. And we talk about disclosure. In reality, even if the government disclosed what they knew, there would be such a fight within this own UFO community, each for their own, shall we say, rendition of whatever they are supporting, that we would be back in the quagmire of confusion as we are today. And I can only say that this field has become more confused and certainly not less over time.
Thanks. What about the ancient aliens? You know, ancient astronauts came about with Eric von Däniken in the 60s, and we have ancient aliens TV show, and they are humanoid as well. So that also, what about your thoughts about that, and what about the height of the extraterrestrials?
Well, let's look at this two-phase. One, of course, we know that if we go back historically or anthropologically, especially through the Pacific Rim, but you cannot solely identify it with that. If you look at Tibetanian, Micronesian, through the Pacific, Hawaiian, when you go to Peru, to the Incas, to the Mayans, throughout the world, Egypt, Greece, wherever you want to go, Rome, the biblical times, you have ancient records of interactions, of our observations to begin with, flying shield, flying scroll, those who came from above. Anything that came from the sky was considered to be angelic and thus considered with wings, but the wings were really part of the Middle Ages, where our artisans began to paint, like in the Sistine Chapel and things like that. That's the snapshot we get. It's not the snapshot from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. India, where they talk about flying chariots, and China as well. So when you look at historically, there's so many decent, shall we say, publications that go back 1700s, 1800s, in fact, that talk about these type of crafts and the fact that they were always interacting with people who came to help them, and then eventually who left and went back to where they came from. So that in itself has got a timeline to it, and that timeline drastically changed in 1961, where the reasons for discrediting these crafts and their occupants went divergent. And we can talk about that in a minute as well. The second question about height and type and what have you, we have the same variety of people on this planet. If you go to the Kalahari Desert, and you'll see that you have people that are anatomically correct, 3.5 feet, 4 feet. I travel the world. I've gone into many Latin American countries where the older generations, grandparents and great-grandparents, are less than 5 feet, and they look just normal. They don't have any physical attributes. Then, of course, you have super tall people. You have the one in the Watusis, and you have people in China. We got a couple basketball players now that are 7'6". And so we have this huge variety of people here. Tall, short, different colored hair, different colored skin, different colored eyes, but they're still human beings, no matter the diversity that you see. And that same diversity exists beyond this planet as well. I'll give you an example. In 1989, we were doing a UFO conference in Frankfurt, Germany. The wall had just come down. 3 Soviet scientists came and wanted to talk to my father. And so he said, fine. We were doing a UFO conference, and a very large one. And so they went and they had a conversation. Several weeks beforehand, they had reported in TASS, which was the Soviets' official newspaper organization, and very heavily censored and screened. They reported one of these UFOs landing in their plain country, out in the plains, and before a little village. And the Soviets said, listen, we have set aside landing areas for these people to land, and they are welcome to come amongst us. And when this craft landed, the people came out, and they were normal just like you and I. He said by the time that same report got to Western European press, they were now 8 feet tall and had long arms and long legs. And then by the time it got to the United States, the American press, they had multiple arms and multiple eyes. And he says, all of that is garbage. All of that is propaganda that is piled upon this subject by those who are, shall we say, told to do so or responsible to do so. So that then hopefully answers your 2 questions there.
Sash, do you have a question? Okay, I'll go with mine. What about the stories of stargates and wormholes? I have a whistleblower that's in the, what do you call it, the secret space program. And I've heard from other people that they have stargates and wormholes. And, of course, we had stargates and wormholes in our Star Trek, which I'm getting reports that a lot of that was from whistleblowers. What do you think about that technology for traveling in space?
Well, the first thing I'll say to your listener is there seems to be amazing amount of continuity between what comes out in sci-fi and that what happens thereafter is people seem to then pick up that ball and replicate it. You didn't hear anything about stargates and wormholes until science fiction broadcast it, and it became norm on the television. Then all of a sudden, it became replicated. And so just like we have subliminal advertising that says drink Coke, and you go and drink Coke because you don't even know why anymore, the same type of thought projection is upon the minds of the normal people. So from the standpoint of talking about stargates and wormholes, we once did an experiment called the Philadelphia experiment, upon which we attempted to transport or teleport, for lack of a better word, a destroyer from one section of an area to the next, because we were hoping that we could use this for battlefield strategy and be able to transport tanks and entire divisions right into the midst of the enemy and thereby have conclusive victory. But what they don't realize is that you cannot mechanically transport the soul of a human being. Oh, they were very successful at transporting innate objects, such as a rock or a chair or this the ship, for instance. But any human being that was incorporated in the field at the same time became horribly molecularly disfigured or totally vaporized. And that is because the principle doesn't work unless you as an individual know how to use it. So so what happens here is we have this huge misnomer and this misinformation that says that you can just step into a wormhole and zip yourself to the other side of creation. In fact, after the last movie that dealt with that, and we've included it in the new book that will hopefully come out here by January, I pulled up the article from the theoretical physicist who was the counselor on that movie, and he says it does. He says wormholes don't exist from the standpoint of astrophysics and the science behind it. This is imagination. And the trouble is, for most people, they don't know the difference. We do not educate ourselves in the science of space or the science of life. We have absolutely no interest in our own biochemistry. Hell, we could give a damn about the entire planetary situation that's going on. So what we have is a whole group of people who have no idea of any of this, the foundation of it, that suddenly just pick up an idea and run with it. And all of a sudden that becomes verbatim. And so what the government is doing, oh yeah, they transport to and from space. We have a secret space program, and they use regular means to get there back and forth. And there are other means in which we have people who are developing what we call remote viewing and things like this, which is all part of your own abilities within you, your conscious abilities. But we have gone way off the hook in this UFO field. And in fact, when you talk about how the government tried to discredit Ken Adamski, they tried that in the beginning and then they left him at home. His biggest fight came within the mystical and psychism field of this particular UFO, shall we call, conglomeration, because they're the ones they throw everything into this pot, and that's not right.
And so why were they trying to discredit Adamski?
Well, remember, he came from the time in the 1950s. You had first of all, you had an enormous amount of sightings. And if you look at the Air Force projections at OWN, they were about 800 a day in some places, and we were talking just in the U.S. and not worldwide. And by Project Blue Book's conclusions, 15% of them by the Air Force's estimate could not be explained by any means that they could come up with. Well, when you're looking at 15% of, 10, big deal. But when you look at 15% of 800 a day, then the numbers start to get quite large. And so everyone that was exposed to in this field at that particular time went through a certain amount of, shall we go, harassment. We had the men in black that came out. A couple agents came up to George and told him if he wouldn't shut up, they'd tie him to the car and drag him down the mountain. What they didn't know is he had a media program the same night, and he went out on the media and exposed their names because he happened to know who they were, and the controlling officer who sent them. And so they started to leave him alone more. and in fact, when he lectured, oftentimes you would see the top brass sitting there in uniform in the front row because they wanted to know. George had such a plethora of information. He helped on satellite development. They came to him and they said, hey, we're sending up stuff. We're getting scrambled data back. He says, why don't you build multiple hulls like the space people are doing, 3 hulls, and put your instrumentation inside the 3rd hull and thus protect it. It worked out great. And he had interaction with several administrations. He used to carry a White House access card in his wallet because George believed that to educate the people who control our country was the best thing to do because these are the people who had their finger on the button. And he did not believe that through misinformation or misguided type of ideology that somebody would do something drastic and poof, there goes the world, because we were right on the edge of it right then and there. And so he worked tenaciously with his space contacts to provide information about the changing planet. He was talking in 1959 already about what we call global warming, which is a misnomer. It really is geophysical change, in which warm areas get cooler, cool get warmer, and you have a mixing of the atmosphere and the pressure gradients, and that causes the changes in weather and the extreme conditions of weather, which also then tend to blend into the melting of the poles and things like that. So we're looking at a situation of change of our planet. It is also a solar systemic change, a change in the sun. And they came to give us information because we're the only ones stuck here on this planet. And if we don't do something to change either our velocity of how fast we are destroying this world or getting off of it, we can be in one heck of a hurt. So he brought that information to our scientists and the government as well. So you really, when somebody talks about George in this field, he's the most controversial, the most that people love to attack, but he's also the longest lasting one in this whole business. And there's a good reason for it.
So he had White House, what did you say he had?
White House access.
White House access.
That's correct. He briefed President Eisenhower and escorted him to a particular event. And then he met in 1960s, he issued invitations to both Senator Kennedy and Vice President Nixon. Mr. Nixon declined. Senator Kennedy agreed. They met. They exchanged information and views, and then later dates, he was given a White House access card, and he went several times there to brief the president.
Does George ever name all the different species? Do they call themselves? We call ourselves human beings and earthlings. Do they have names for themselves? Where did they come from? Do they have bases on the moon, Mars, Venus? Like, what's that big one that was at the White House? Valiant Thor, those type of era.
I'll tell you a little bit about Val Thor. In the fall of 1965, George had passed away in April. Val Thor came to our door, and my father opened the door, and there stood Val Thor. And my father laughed at him and said, "Hey, I know who you are." And Val says, "Really? Who am I?" He says, "You're a government agent that works for the Pentagon to create misinformation in this field." And Val Thor laughed and says, "Yeah, that's true." And my father says, "Well, you don't have any invitation to come in here and cause confusion. You'll have to go somewhere else." And that was that was the conversation, and you can take it to its own conclusion. But otherwise, what George did talk about, as you can see, when we say that we have had a wide and varied history in this field, we certainly have. But what George talked about was that human beings, I know it's a tough concept for people to understand now, because we have become so bombarded and so massaged in our brain with all these different species concept. And because we don't understand how planetary geophysics works, and we don't understand because we don't go out into space, and we don't give the public the real information. So we have this huge veil of ignorance that surrounds everything. And it can be penetrated if people show some own initiative, and they go and look to educate themselves and not have just information handed to them on a platter. Because when it's handed onto a platter, then you gobble up what somebody else says and not your own experiences. And your own experiences are very important. And so he talked about the fact that the moon is used as an observation platform. In fact, if you remember Dr. Carl Sagan, he said the moon is a perfect observation platform for those who would come from space to observe us. And in fact, one of the pictures that I've got, and I sent you, that picture of Gassendi Major, that was taken in the 1930s by the Mount Wilson Observatory. And if you look at that carefully, it's right next to the portrait of George Adamski on your website. You will see a huge amount of construction, linear, straight lines, right angles, tubular constructions in Gassendi Major, going through the crater wall and out the other side, in fact. Astronomers have noted over a period of time and watched them increase in number and then over time decrease in number, because as our technology developed, we began shooting our lasers and our microwaves, and even we wanted to shoot a nuclear bomb at the moon as well, because we're sometimes on the brink of insanity in our minds. And so a lot of the, shall you say, activity on the moon over time started to move to the backside of the moon. A couple of reasons. One, you've got yourself less of the Earth's pull, the huge amount of gravitational pull on the moon that affects a certain amount of its gravity and lunar atmosphere on the front side versus the back. And also the fact they want to protect themselves from our random little experiments and things like that. But you have Gassendi Crater, you have the Straight Wall, you have Archimedes, Aristarchus, you have areas where you see objects moving around the lunar surface. In fact, if you look at the Royal Astronomical Society over in England in the turn of the century, they noted several 50-mile-long opaque objects moving along the lunar surface. And if we look here at the 1966 chronology listing of lunar events that came out from NASA, because I have that here in my lecture book, and it discussed mists on the moon, weather patterns, blinking lights, all kinds of things. Also relayed by the astronauts, and that's part of the information that we brought forth in the book Alien Bases. By far not the only book on this subject. Later there were a couple other books, one called Moongate, this is NASA's secret space program by William Bryans, the third I believe it is, and the other one was called Somebody Else is on the Moon by George Leonard. And so we kind of launched off this lunar anomaly investigation, both by the observations through our own 12.5-inch telescope and thereafter by access to NASA's microfiche. During that 22-panel scientist discussion, several of the scientists were sympathetic to this particular cause, and not everybody comes out and slaps out their name to satiate our insecurities. They let information flow underneath the table. It's more important the information and not the source, because we always want to know Dr. So-and-so or politician so-and-so once, give me a name so I can believe what I'm being told. Well, hell, if you believe them, you'll believe anything. So these avenues of writing to and acquiring the microfiche later in the 70s from the Apollo program, I have in the vault a series of 15 by 11 Hasselblad photographs in which we ordered from thousands and thousands of photographs from NASA that used to compile that particular book and to show people that it's just not us that are seeing some kind of activity on the moon. And as my father used to say, and this was greatly misconstrued again, but my father used to say, if there was only one picture in that book that provides you without any doubt that something's going on, he said he'd do his job. And that book's about 100 and some pictures. And some people may agree with what they see and some may not, but there's got to be at least one picture in there that says to you, gee, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
So, there's a couple more questions. Where did George say that the space people that he met with are from?
He spoke of space people from this solar system. He spoke of several different planets, from Mars, from Venus, from Saturn.
So they're on our solar system. Are they from beyond? Are any of them from beyond, or are they limited to this solar system?
There are others that come from different solar systems as well. That's a more lengthy process. But the idea that we are harboring environmental conditions on planets in this solar system that we are constantly revising from the hardline stance that we used to hold. The moon was one of those very same situations where we said, oh, the dead moon and blah, blah, blah. Yet we have articles from 1962 and then 1971 after the Apollo that left instrumentation that measured lunar geysers for 7 to 14 hours. Mm-hmm. And so now you add that, you add the observation of clouds, which obscure the edge of the craters. You look at that one picture that I sent you there that looks like you have material pouring from one crater to the other. That's not right next to the alien bases on the moon cover that you have to the left side of that. If you look into the crater there, about to your 11 o'clock position, you have a big crater, and above it a small crater, and the close-up is even better. But that general shot shows you like milk pouring from a pitcher, or gravel being shoveled from up high above down to a lower section as it pours into the lower crater. And so there we get the theory that the moon is being mined for its natural resources. And to mine the moon or to mine the asteroid belt is a far better logical conclusion than it is to devastate our own planet. So obviously somebody else is doing that. And we look at the conditions on Mars. Now, if you look at the range in National Geographic from the temperatures on the Earth, about 160 degrees below zero to 130. Then they say on Mars it's about 180 degrees below zero to at least above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So now we're saying, okay, you've got temperatures above the freezing zone, you have a polar ice cap, you have water. And the funny thing is, in 1964, in George's publication, The Science of Life, in lesson 11, he talks about Mars having lots of salt water. Well, what was it, 3 weeks ago when we finally admitted that our own observations was that Mars has salt water? How in the world would that man know that if he didn't have inside information? And so now we have, the other day they said they have 1 millibar of pressure. Then I listened the other day on the news, they're saying, well, they're talking about Mars' atmosphere having 1/3 that of the Earth, which is a lot more than 1 millibar. And we talk about looking at the storms on Mars going up to 50,000 feet. If you do not have a substantial atmosphere to support those particles, how in the world are they going to be blowing around at that altitude? So what happens is you have to take the crumbs and start to put them together like a puzzle in order to get a better understanding of what's going on. Venus, the same thing. One guy says 800 degrees, the other one says 400 degrees, which is already 100% difference, right? Then they say, hey, we got jagged mountains, and yet they don't tell you how, if Venus is supposed to be 800 degrees with 400-mile-an-hour winds and an atmosphere 6 times denser than boiling water, how in the world they land a probe with a parachute? And how in the world do you have jagged mountains? That planet would be blown completely smooth like a marble, sandblasted. So the information we get versus the information that is actual has a great disparity to it.
Mm-hmm. I have another question. You have a question, Sasha? Okay, I'll keep going with mine until he, comes up with some, and then we're going to have Karen come in. I want to kind of backtrack a little bit, begin contact, and why did they choose George?
Yeah.
Why did they choose George?
Well, that's an interesting question because you could say that about anybody. You could say, why did somebody else have contact and not George? Well, let's put it this way. George was very sympathetic to this particular field already earlier in his life. He was speaking and trying to educate people about the universality of life already back to the 1920s and 1930s. And so perhaps they decided they liked what they saw. I mean, there are many other people that have been contacted, legitimately contacted as well, and many of those who haven't been. But for those who have, they have passed on information. Some of them wanted their name associated to it. Most of them did not. I know a number of scientists who passed along information. Some of them had contact. Like George said, whenever I went up on the ships, there was always a recognizable figure there as well. And there was a particular point in time when Hoover and his anti-communist campaign decided to go after George. And George says, "Come on, call me to testify. I will give you the names, dates, and locations of everybody else that I saw on these ships with me." And the FBI was told to stand down.
Did you give any of the names? Can you tell us any of the names of famous people?
No, I wouldn't do so. Even if I could, I wouldn't do so because I think it's irrelevant. Many of these people have passed. Others have relations that are still around, and does it really make a difference? I used to tell people in this field when we went to talk that names, accolades, academic, alphabet soup behind your name, this is all immaterial if you don't present what you have to say in a way that people can have some kind of benefit from it. If the information that you're presenting doesn't stand on its own, no amount of stripes on your shoulders or on your arms are going to make any difference. That's just to placate those who don't wish to follow through on rationalizing it. They want it once again on a platter. Here it is for me. Can I believe it? And that doesn't how it's going to work. They are not going to come here and save our world for us unless it has effect upon the rest of the solar system, because we have the right to conduct affairs on our world, and we have the right to learn from them and try to reverse them, and that if by chance the situation deteriorates to such a point that the Earth becomes endangered, well, that then endangers the rest of the planets in the system. You cannot yank a planet out of the system without adversely affecting the rest of the gravitational system from the sun in sequence. So then if we were stupid enough to destroy our world, then we would, in effect, affect theirs as well. And then they would step in. If you look at the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, it's a very good rendition of a lot of truisms in this field.
So are there intergalactic police that go around and tell everybody to behave, or we're going to shut down your electronics?
No. No, they don't do that. They can give us, there's been several circumstances where they have shown us the abilities of what we call the pro-gravity field when you blend with the power that the planet itself produces, because sometimes we need some kind of a thing to shock us into motion, but they would never do anything that is of a destructive nature. They only would be to motivate us. And personally, I think we do need a race of robots to keep us straight on this world. We definitely could use it. But as far as coming from space, no, they're not going to do that. They've got their own lives, their own technology, their own advancement, their own exploration of space, and you know, come on, we're a very small ant in a very big ant pile.
Just talking about the scenario if they blow up the Earth, which affects the solar system. how would they intervene and prevent us from blowing up the Earth? Would it be something like in the day the Earth stood still, where they just rendered all of our weapons inert?
Let's say this. They are extremely active in monitoring the geophysical condition of our planet. A lot of the spacecrafts that are reported coming in and out of the ocean, and I used to know a very good friend of mine, he's now deceased, an airline pilot, that when he was a pilot in Perth in Western Australia, he was flying executives back and forth via helicopter from the mainland to the oil platforms. And one night, coming back from the oil platform, he noticed that the water underneath him started to take a luminescent, bubbling kind of appearance, and out of the ocean came this large, several thousand-foot-long craft that hovered and then shot into space. And this happened during the time when I was editing my father's book around 1992 when I met him. And he wanted to see what I was doing, and I handed him the book, and he looked at these pictures of Adamski's photographs, and he says, that's exactly what I saw. And what's happening is, in the deepest trenches around Puerto Rico and Marianas and everything else, which gets closer to the core, they go down and they take their technology to take a snapshot, a three-dimensional snapshot of the core, of the condition of the mantle, the condition of the different earthquake zones and gas belts and things like this, in order to take a very precise view of this world, in order to maintain how quick the process is. By science, this is no a surprise.
All right, well, we have to stop right there. We're going to be on a brief break, about 3 minutes.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com with your host Jan Kira Lesson and Dr. Sasha Lesson. And during the second half of this show, we are going to bring on board Karen Christine Patrick. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind our listeners that Revolution Radio is listener supported. So please do go over to the donation button on freedomslips.com and donate what you can. $1, $5, $10, $15, $20, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated, and we do thank you very much for your donation. For your donations allow us to bring you these types of shows. So thank you very much once again. Okay, I'm going to bring on Karen Christine Patrick. Karen, are you there?
Yes, I am. I've been enjoying listening.
well, we're going to have you come on here and ask all the questions you want this second hour. And Glenn, are you there?
Oh, yes, I am.
Okay, so Karen, what would you like to ask? I know you were probably jotting down notes and you have a lot of things to say, because right now you are researching a lot of these anomalies, Mars. Well, so go ahead.
Lunar anomalies, yes, lunar anomalies. I'm one of the administrators for an amateur group. We're the Lunar Anomaly Research Society. We're kind of later in the game, younger people who are learning some of this for the first time. And some of the things that you talked about, we're familiar with, the wonderful list of anomalies over, many, many centuries even that were noticed by very early astronomers that noticed lights on the surface and whatnot. And so I'm familiar with some of that. I'm working on as being the editor of the autobiography of Dr. Ken Johnston, who worked at the Lunar Receiving Lab in Apollo 11, I believe 12, 13, and 14, when they brought photographs and artifacts like moon rocks back from the lunar surface. This is where this would have been brought in, and the rocks would have been weighed, and the photographs would have been, the cartridges would have been discharged from the Hasselblad camera, and then developed and, of course, cataloged. And I think that I'm just enjoying what you're saying about just kind of giving the chronology of what was going on with the scientists who were discussing this information. And I'm now living in New Mexico, so some of those meetings you're talking about might have been some around here somewhere. Yeah. And it's great. And thank you for that history. And then I guess some of the questions that came up in my mind as you were talking and giving this really wonderful history is, okay, so you have Ken Johnston as well as Dr. Edgar Mitchell and now recently another space station astronaut talking about, of course not too many of the astronauts have been talking about what they've seen on their missions and whatnot. If they did, they were told to be quiet. And so you're kind of saying something I'm curious about, in the sense that there seems to be a split in the opinion of the ones going over this information as to whether it should be revealed to us or not, or how it should be revealed to us or not. And so George Adamski was wonderfully proactive of let us know and not keep us in the dark, and I think that's great. How come these other scientists have not come up and more vociferously backed up Ken Johnston and other NASA whistleblowers? Because by now, if they were concerned about misinformation about this topic, so the genie's out of the bottle a little. Now it's very confusing, and some of these guys aren't with us anymore. Like, when is it going to be time for them to come out? And you said disclosure's already happened. I think to a certain extent I agree. It just wasn't done by like a disclosure big D event like the president coming in, any president, pick one, right? Coming along later and saying, yes, this is true, and leaving us researchers who really want to know and are trying to have that personal research and do a good job. We're kind of cast with everything tinfoil hat when we're actually talking about very good evidence. So, what do you think that process is at this point? What's going on in your opinion?
Well, let's give credit where credit's due. We talked about the astronauts. If you're familiar with Maurice Chatelain, who holds the telecommunications patents for Apollo, in his book, Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, he categorizes every single space mission that we have conducted publicly. And his statement was that every single mission was accompanied by UFOs. In some circumstances, music was broadcast in to the capsules. And he goes on to list them chronologically, and they can find that, I believe in that book somewhere, page around 34. So we talk about Gordon Cooper, who was very vocal in his lifetime right? Even produced a book, Leap of Faith, in which he describes some of his encounters. And you have people who have had experiences that got reported later in the U.S. news services. Ed White, Deke Slayton. My God, if you go down the list of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts, Edgar Mitchell, Brian O'Leary, there's some talk that Armstrong talked before he passed away, and so on and so forth. So now you've got some of these guys that go into space. Remember, up to that particular point, and probably till now, NASA is still a military organization. It's still funded, and it's still, shall we say, incorporates the military standard for the recruitment of astronauts and what have you. They have a high, very, very high profile. And so once you have taken this particular oath, you also take a secrecy oath, and that oath is to the nation. And so we have to understand and have some sympathy for these people who are put in such a terrible quandary of knowing something that is literally affects everybody on the planet, and the same token being very crucially scrutinized. One particular lieutenant colonel out of Salt Lake started to talk, and he was summoned to the Pentagon, and he was told if he doesn't shut up, he doesn't get his military pension anymore. Some of the scientists the same way, whether it was Carl Sagan, who spoke earlier in his career, whether Panampura was another one. There's a whole list probably we can go through and dig up of scientists. I have some of the quotes of them on the back of our page, or on the website as well, where they talk about billions of planets being inhabited, and so on and so forth. So the notion is there. Now the other part of this is, as we spoke before, how much do we have to pile on a plate? Which president are you going to accept, one party or the other? Which congressmen, which are practically all liars to begin with, are you going to accept? So who is it that is going to be this irrefutable spokesperson that you believe will give you 100% of the information that you seek? It doesn't exist. So what happens is information then becomes leaked. Information gets forwarded through other avenues. And then we have to go and pick up that information. It's called work, research. All of us, we went all to school and university. We had to write a paper. We have to educate ourselves. So that means we have to do something for it. It just doesn't miraculously appear in our heads. And so do we get to what we call full disclosure? What I've been told is the only time we will get to full disclosure that if we can make this alien a threat, the next form of terrorism. Because we are working in a world where oil and military hardware are the very backbone of our economic systems. The instigation of hotspots, we are all guilty of, every government on this planet, in order to keep their economies running. And so, when you look at this is how we are running our planet. Now you expect us and the powers to be to embrace free energy. Some tell you it doesn't exist. I can guarantee you it does. I've seen the experiments. You expect us to embrace the fact that we will no longer be using a petroleum-based. We won't be judged anymore by the beautiful, shiny color of our car or the cost of that automobile to define who and what we are. It is not so much that it endangers governments. It also endangers people's perceptions. We are a population that is not yet ready to change. And if you look at world events, you see the proof of that right there. So you have to be very careful upon how much knowledge and how much information is released and forwarded. I give you an example. The last Adamski film taken in Silver Springs in 1965 showed the undercarriage of the Scout and the velocities of the different rotating rings underneath it in relationship to the change of magnetic force between the three ball condensers. That piece of film was cut off purposely and given back to the authors of that film so that it would not fall into military hands. Even though when we went to NASA in '66, they already had most of the inkling of how it worked. So we have to be extremely careful and cautious because we are not rational people.
So how did they have all that information already? Was there any kind of connection with, like, the Nazis, how they got all their information?
Well, what happens in this particular field, like any field, politics or what have you, innuendo is thrown out, it's taken like a football and run with, and then nobody does any backward looking. The original accusation that all these type of crafts came from the Nazis is an absurd, because if you do about 5 seconds of research, you can find photographs of these crafts still in 1918 over Central Europe. Nazis didn't even exist till 1933, and neither did they go into their experimentals in Peenemünde until 37 and 39. And so what happens is the Germans were just like the Japanese. Everybody copies what they see. So they saw these crafts in action over Europe and around the world, and they figured, okay, well, this is what a saucer craft looks like. So let's go ahead and duplicate it and see how far we get. And if you look historically, they were all propelled with turbines like a jet engine from beneath, very unstable, and not of any benefit. But yet they copied what they saw. And so this is one of these stories that jumped because somebody decided, okay, we'll just accuse the Nazis of doing it. And then somebody else came out and said, well, it wasn't the Nazis, it was really Stalin who recruited a bunch of midgets and built spaceships to go scare the crap out of everybody. And that's about as absurd as the first thing. And so until we have some kind of a little bit of a grasp of real history of what's going on in this subject, we just tend to ping-pong around from one tale to the next. And once again, it does an immense disservice to the public because all we do is confuse the heck out of them.
What about Tesla? Was he in touch with extraterrestrials?
Absolutely. He had Marconi was originally had some kind of communication he received from Mars, and then Tesla also had a certain amount of interaction as well. To what extent, whether it was face-to-face, and how much material transferred is something I don't know. Only Tesla himself could tell you. But the man is literally responsible for all the electricity and all the other inventions that come down. Westinghouse and the other guy literally raped him from his patents and took everything. And when you children go to school, they talk about everybody else with electricity except for Nikola Tesla.
Yeah. So what are these crop circles? Are they anything extraterrestrial? Any ideas?
I can only give you a little bit of my own personal opinion, and that's all it is.
Okay.
My opinion on this is this. We are extremely unreliable as a people here on this planet. And I know from those who had legitimate face-to-face contact with extraterrestrials, with space people, they come and face-to-face give you the message because they know how much we screw things up in a nanosecond. And we misunderstand everything. And so they have determined to come face-to-face and tell us what they mean in the language that we're accustomed to so we don't misunderstand, and in most cases it's screwed up anyway. So, since none of us from birth are trained in telepathy, the proper use of it, it is a very unlikely source of thorough information. So now we look at crop circles. They come to us in complex symbology in which nobody can tell you what it means, other than somebody saying, well, it must be to extraterrestrials since it's strange. And let me tell the listener right now, not everything you see in the sky comes from outer space, and not everything that you don't know what it is extraterrestrial in nature. This is a very bad fallback position. So you look at an intricate symbol, and nobody knows what it is, but yet somebody tells us it is of such importance that it has cataclysmic or global significance. 20 years later, nobody knows what the hell it means. But one thing I do know that we are experimenting, and have experimented for a long time, with lasers, and that was already a part of the cattle mutilation project in 63 out there in 64s in Colorado. We experiment with microwave projection. We do orbital platforms in which we have them pointed towards the Earth versus out into space. And we have no problem doing a little experimentation whenever we think we need to, or to kill two birds with one stone by the agencies that control these particular devices. Whether they are responsible for all of them, we know a certain amount have been hoaxed, and that's been proven. One can only say, but I will never jump on a platform prematurely and say, look, it's got to be from outer space, it's got to be extraterrestrial. And some of the people who were reported small flying discs, these registering discs, are very sympathetic to being drones. I mean, I know a great deal of people out here in the Southwest that are up against military operation in restricted areas that see a whole bunch of drones. And all of them are unidentified flying objects, but not necessarily from space. So I think the jury's out on that one. There's a lot of, shall we say, willingness to jump to conclusions. And so on the day that President Kennedy was assassinated, we saw a lot of that too, and that was many years ago.
It's 52 years ago today. I just wanted to acknowledge Kennedy. I was, 9 years old and in third grade. I'm sure those who were alive then will never forget that day. Karen, I wanted you to come back and ask a question if you have one. We'll go back and forth.
Yes, I was interested in your collection of Hasselblad images because that was another thing I'm working with Ken Johnston is his archive of imagery, which is significant. I was just wondering what was the process, what you were able to get those? Because I'm always interested if there's a collection out there somewhere, because we are trying to encourage anomalists to look at some of these materials, these more older materials, because they're less, of course, potentially manipulated in any way by the modern Photoshop techniques and whatnot. I was just kind of curious how that process occurred for you. Was it through the Freedom of Information Act or what?
What we did is we wrote directly to NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. If you send me an email later on or give me a call, I'll take a look in archives and see what I can do here in the next day or so digging up. But these addresses are old, and I'm sure they have changed over time. There may be some on the microfiche catalogs, and I'll have to dig that out of the vault. But to give you an example here, if you look on the web, the added picture of the lunar, what we call Lunar Orbiter 4 picture, which is below the cover of my father's book, you see a crater and you see a cigar-shaped device parked next to it, and by examining the light source, basically the sunlight coming from the north, illuminating the crater, the southern crater rim, you can see that like a cigar, it stands next to it. I've had 2 letters that came to me over time. One of them that says, one fellow says, I ordered the picture and I got it exactly as you have it. And the other fellow who ordered the picture got the picture and got it airbrushed with nothing on it, neither the crater nor the device. So
that's happened with different people comparing notes. Do you know what year you started collecting that type of imagery?
Let's see. I would have to say middle to late 70s. I'm going to guesstimate right here and say about 76.
Okay.
So we started to get some of these pictures then, and then we collected them from that time until the book was published in 81.
Oh, wonderful.
And once the book came out, I will only say that we got 99.9% positive reviews. There's some people that were rather upset with it, but c'est la vie, as they say in French. Once again, you just have to look at it and make your own determinations. We also used to collaborate with a number of amateur astronomers that would look from different angles. Like, for instance, when we reported the large cigar-shaped craft in Aristarchus, then we made a few calls to other parts in the country. We were in Mexico at that time. Another fellow that used to be up in Michigan, and then another fellow there in Europe, and then they were in subsequent time zones. once it became dark enough, they would look to see if they would get the same thing, and they did. So we eliminated refraction or reflection. A very good friend of mine is a retired aerospace engineer out there in Phoenix, and he had sightings of these craft while he was on deployment in the Marines in 1950. And so he went to his superior officer and asked for where he could get more information, and they said, go talk to George Adamski. So he did, and they became fast friends, and on one afternoon in 1957, one of these craft flew low level over the trees and touched down on the field on the Adamski property, and they were all running around like crazy going, look, look, look. He later went on as an aerospace engineer, worked for Allied Signal. He also worked for NASA on the heat shield as well, and I just visited him last week. He's probably listening tonight, and he can tell you with his 8-inch Celestion, he has it hooked up and set up through a video system that goes directly to the television. So he's able to control the clock drive by a little remote control like you would, a gamester, and then broadcast directly on the TV. And he can move the viewfinder around to particular areas and just record. And he records some outstanding activity, still to this day.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. We've known some other people who are doing that direct observation, and everyone's doing their part to look at that and do their homework. I know a lot of people who are really working hard to get that type of footage of not just the moon, but whatever they can see in space. And by various means, I just talked to people who are working on trying to get filmography using infrared and other frequencies of photography. So there are a lot of people taking an interest in this. And what would be your advice to get good provenance, like you had good provenance of those photos? What would be your advice to the people who are taking an interest? How would they need to go about it to get really good provenance of their material so we can advance our knowledge?
Well, I think we have to be cognizant of a few things. Over time, many different organizations have come and gone. In the 50s, under Admiral Rickencotter, we had NICAP. And then NICAP turned into a different agency, and eventually we have MUFON, and we have other different organizations, so on and so forth. Each of them, in a particular time in this history of things, have been infiltrated by people who work for misinformation projects, whether we describe them as government agencies or not. And information ends up getting data-based, and people getting perhaps a little harassed or what have you. So it's very important to put together an organization where, perhaps like your organization there, where you are very cognizant of keeping the center core structure of people reliable and loyal, and not to expand. Everybody wants to jump. Let's get bigger. Let's get brighter. Let's pull everybody in that we can. And then once again, we're back to the shepherd's pie of confusion stew. And so what happens is we have to give these people an avenue upon which they can take their observations and their photographs and give it or share it, is a better word, with those who wish to promote this subject and bring it forth. Now, the other side of that coin is that we have to be, as a receiving agent, extremely cognizant of the fact that technology and computer programs are extremely sophisticated and can easily replicate or fake pictures and material. I have seen a number of it. And so that leaves us then with the burden of making sure what we get is authentic, or being extremely selective of what we then turn around and make available at a greater scale. So it's going to take a bit of work and a bit of effort, and a whole lot of, shall we say, honesty in order to make this happen. The bottom line to all of this is that we have to show people that there is a reason to have a vibrant space program. What NASA has failed to do, and it's not because they probably wished it, it's because politics demand it, is they have failed to remind everybody that downstream technology from all the research and development that we have gotten benefit for. Our one laptop has more computing power than all those computers during the Apollo mission. All the micro miniaturization, all the technology in one form or another that has come downstream from the space program is amazing. And in fact, Hugh Downs once said that we gained a 4-to-1 profit margin for every dollar that's invested in space. But yet the general public believes that we are just taking money and shooting it up there for no good reason, and they are not reminded of the benefit of it. When you look at our satellite technology and you look at that last hurricane, the highest one recorded in wind velocity hitting the Mexican peninsula, we have pictures and tracking and trending, saving thousands of lives today that we never had 50 years ago. And nobody stops to think because it's just flashed on the television for them. Oh boy, what's the weather today? That's it. And so we have not sold to the American public well enough the benefits of space. President Kennedy wanted the space program to eventually become our major economic driver. It reduced tensions, it reduced discrimination, it reduced one country from another. Many people don't know that the scientists for Soyuz and Space Lab and all those things were in constant collaboration and contact between the Soviets and the Americans and the French and everybody else, while in the newspaper you picked it up and it was, oh boy, we want to bomb the hell out of them again today. So what happens beneath the surface is quite different than what is going on above the surface, and we have to find a way to rationally and logically breach that surface so that we can give people a reason to embrace the space program and say, hey, let's not just send robots out there because robots are easily manipulated. That's why you're getting information that's so contrary. 800 degrees, 400 degrees, 50 to 100 degrees in lightning storms on Venus they record. Well, heck, that's not even near 800. The numbers are so different, and nobody says, well, wait a minute here. Who is programming these numbers? Who is making these alignments? As a pilot, my instrumentation is only as good as the information that goes in, whether it has been set up by the avionics department or the maintenance department, or whether I have to recalibrate the instrumentation myself over a period of time. It makes all the difference in the world. How easy it is to simply recalibrate the instrumentation for, let's say, a 50% or even 100% error, close up that device and shoot it into space. And while all those people sit happily downstreams at the computers at JPL and other places, and they're not part of any conspiracy, they're looking at data that comes directly to them. But only somebody else knows what the recalibration factor is. And I think that may be part of it. Once again, that's my opinion.
I have a couple questions. What do you think about the Roswell incident? And, of course, you have the story of Colonel Phil Corso, who took that wreckage and created a lot of the technologies that we have, from Velcro to the stealth bomber. So first of all, there's the Roswell incident, and then the reverse engineering of the byproducts from the crash. What do you think?
Well, we know Roswell happened. It's not by far the only one. They had a much larger crash in Siberia. I believe it was in 1908. But in the United States, we have Roswell, we have Cortez, we have Aztec. There are a number of different malfunction zones of these particular craft. And they may be, of course, different craft from different planets, not all the same group. But I do know this, from George's statements on it, and he also knew Cy Newton, who lectured at the University of Colorado. They described 5 bodies, humanoid in appearance, suffering from what we would call explosive decompression in tandem to high electrocution. So basically what happened is this malfunction of the craft within a thunderstorm allowed the penetration of the electricity into the craft at the same time rupturing the hull. So you have bloatedness of the body due to explosive decompression, which is a symptom of on aircraft malfunctions when those happen as well. And then you have the electrocution effect, a jarring effect of so many thousands and thousands of watts of electricity. These 5 bodies were recovered, all dead, no one living. And there's where the tangents change. Somebody then claims, well, one of them survived, and we found him walking around, and the Indians adopted him. Nonsense. The next one was, well, one survived, and we took him to Area 51, and we kept him located and locked up there. Nonsense. Because there is absolutely what kind of locking mechanism or security system do you think that you have that's going to secure a being that is several thousand years more advanced than you in technology? None. And that happened in the 1940s when we didn't have anything but locks and guards.
The theory is that she wanted to be. It was like the Trojan horse. You know, you can't hold them captive. But the story of Errol the Grey, as told to. Anyway, there was a nurse, and then she came out with the documents and wrote a book, and I forget the guy's last name. Interview with anyway, it's one of the interview books, and there's a whole series of YouTubes. So that's one of the theories, is that, no, they couldn't hold her because she was pretty telepathic and able to do whatever she wanted to, including manipulating the minds.
Well, the point of the matter is there were 5 bodies anyway, and the people who were there during that time can confirm 5 dead bodies. They were flown through Dallas, Fort Worth, eventually to Wright-Patterson. Several of them were in cold storage in Walter Reed many, many decades ago. That is not a publicly known piece of information. But the bottom line is that the remains were sequestered into cold storage, which is something that we would normally do anyway. And then, of course, whatever downstream technology that may or may not have come from those craft, that is a benefit. But it's easy to make claims and more difficult to prove those claims. But we do know that the remains of the craft had symbology in them and provided a great deal of elasticity that is unknown to the type of materials that we're using, simply because we use heat to put metals together, and heat affects the molecular alignment of elements when you heliarc them and fuse them together, whereas their system is a bonding of the metals and the glass, and so there is no difference. There's no seams and rivets and things like that. You're simply just using a molecular alignment to bond the glass to the metal and to fuse it together in a systematic way that one goes from one to the other. So you end up with a very lovely type of space vehicle that works very good. And hopefully eventually we have developed our own methods of going back and forth to the moon with these crafts. Not so much further, although there has been some tangible talk about us going to Mars with our rendition of it already in the 60s in the book Alternative 3. So, it's there's still pieces out there, and there's still information to go through.
So, okay, we're getting a question. Let's see. It's not all about peace beyond modern borders. If we celebrate the difference in the knowledge of the ancients handed down from earth, tribe, and tongue, don't you all think this would be the only way forward globally? I'm not sure what that's in response to. Something about, go ahead, you can comment on that.
Just quickly here, our Native American brothers and sisters and our island brothers and sisters have over time still maintained a fraction of their connectivity to nature, and all the principles and all the science of nature has really led us to where we are. I'll give you an example quickly. One hydro engineer wanted to develop a pump And by looking at a cross-section of a nautilus, they went ahead and used that as a model to increase pump efficiency by 300%. Everywhere we go, whether we look at the medications that are developed out of the Amazon jungle, which we have now clear-cut 50%. It was just on the news 2 days ago. All of the medications and the examples of what we can do to progress ourselves in a congruent manner with nature versus constantly fighting it would greatly enhance us. Now, that's not to mean that you have to go back to nature in a way where you live in a cave and wear a loinskin, because that's nonsense as well. You're supposed to use the principles to the benefit of a better life and not so much the making it more arduous than it is already. And so they, in some terms, have lost that understanding as well. But in some cases, they are still willing to look at that. So we'll embrace their interpretation.
Okay, I have one more question back to Karen. So this is so what Corso was talking about in his book The Day After Roswell was not only the reverse engineered project, but the secret space program, and we alluded to this a little bit, how we had been to the moon and Mars, and there's also currently several whistleblowers like Corey Good, Randy Kramer, Andrew Brishago, and there's others that are talking about, the Mars base, moon bases, and the secret space program. What's your awareness of all those things that are going on?
Well, I remember years ago, a good friend of mine I used to fly with, he made the accusations that we didn't go to the moon. A lot of people love to pick that ball up because they basically saw one too many reruns of Capricorn 1, which was a 1970s movie, which they did, in fact, fake the mission, although they never got off the ground. And once you look at the photographs, I sat down with this gentleman, pulled out brought the pictures out from archives purposely, and this was at a UFO convention in Laughlin years and years ago. And I said, here we go, take a look at this. You can see the LEM, you can see the lunar module, each photographing each other over the moon's horizon as you see the craters down below from several different angles. And he said, yeah, undoubtedly, that these are original pictures, and we went. And I said, well, why in God's name do you consider to hype this? That we didn't. And that's because he got media attention from it. And I think that's not right. And then I got another question. And one guy asked me, he says, well, we never went to the moon. And I said, are you aware that not only that professional but amateur telescope operators from around the world tracked Apollo from launch, past its slingshot, to the moon, and to the moon itself, where you could watch it landing if you had a good enough instrument? I said, are you aware of that? That thousands of people, and they were absolute stunned silence, because this particular fellow had been born after the fact and just wanted to have conspiracy stamped on his forehead because it's easy to scream and much more difficult to prove. And he had nothing to say. And then he said, well, maybe it was remote control. I said, maybe you should get your story straight.
Karen, you probably have questions. Back to you.
I know I have more questions than we're going to have time for, so I'm going to prioritize. This has been fascinating. Thank you. And a couple things that do come up from the We Never Went to the Moon crowd, just to ask, is the Van Allen belt situation. And I was wondering if you could comment, that seems to be an impenetrable barrier to some people who believe we didn't go. I was just wondering what George Adamski and what he learned from the more advanced craft of the ET people, how do they handle this particular barrier?
Well, let's not look at it as a barrier. Every planet has a series of what you call electromagnetic belts. That is the byproduct of the north-south centrifugal gyroscopic motion of the planet. And why in the world is it considered a barrier that you can come in but you can't go out? Show me anybody who can prove that. And then you look at the fact that the crafts have certainly gone out. I mean, if you tracked it through telescope to the moon, then obviously it penetrated. A magnetic belt isn't the same thing as a virtual belt where it's not any different than a magnetic field that exists around every living thing. Every plant, every person produces a cellular energy projection from around their body. Carillion photography shows that. And so that means that I can't touch you? Well, obviously I can. So wherever these people get these notions from, they make these statements, but they can't substantiate them. And then it goes and it compounds from there. So the Van Allen radiation belt has nothing to do with that. It protects the outer ionosphere. And oftentimes we have falsely recorded it as the source of temperatures on the surface. There was one recording in 1970s that said it was 1,050 degrees on Earth, and obviously wasn't, because they were recording the radiation off the belt. But to take this one step thought further, while I still have it in my mind, when they did the Viking second test instrumentation, and they did it in the Atacama Desert down there in Chile, and this was a 2003 article, I believe I have. The scientists say there's no life on this planet based upon the instrument readings of these instruments.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to say, hey, we got a long way.
There might be no intelligent life, but there's life.
Well, yeah, that's true. We're going to have to. The jury's still out on intelligent life. That's true. So anyway, the Van Allen radiation belt has anything to do with it. Just like the asteroid belt has nothing to do with it, that won't allow Magellan and the rest of them to go to the edge of the solar system, and so on and so forth. These are all superstitions and misnomers that somebody throws out there, and nobody logically says, well, wait a minute here. Where's some science behind this?
Excellent, thank you. I do have another question.
Well, go for it.
Yes, one more. Because this is coming up in conversations that I've had. I'm a younger person, not that young, but fairly younger, and so I'm talking to the children and grandchildren in some cases of astronauts, NASA people, scientists, and they're all coming to the same era of the, family history, is that, this person that had these experiences passed them on, passed pictures on, documentation, all that sort of thing. I think it's amazing that the Adamski Foundation was able to preserve that information for posterity. Just an idea of how does one, what would be your advice to these younger people who are inheriting all of this information that might be deteriorating, and they don't know where to take it, and they don't have the money to start kind of foundation. What's some ideas that you can give them to help preserve this? Because it's a bit frustrating, that your grandfather or father told you a story, and it's not affirmed in the mainstream situation, and you've got this evidence, and now what? So I'm just curious what you say.
I understand that quandary all the time, because I used to drive my university teachers absolutely bonkers, simply because I would bring up information that was totally contrary to what they wanted to push, and I said, well, here it is, here it's on print, here's the reference. But let's make this simple. The younger generation, let's take the impressionable ages of, let's say, the first few grades of school, in which they have a great deal of susceptibility and desire to learn. They see us as those who would teach them properly without deceit or deception. And that's a very important distinction. And so what we need to do with that group is to just talk to them. They have been exposed to enough science fiction that the thought of life beyond this world is not foreign to them at all. They say, oh, yeah, sure, I saw it on TV, blah, blah, blah. And in a way, it's not bad, because it opens their minds a little bit further, and you don't find that they're close to it to begin with. And so then you can take that step and talk to them and say, well, wow, people, we have heard of the people here, let's say in the islands, who have come and And, Uncle so-and-so saw this landed in so-and-so valley, which actually happened when my father was in call-in radio in the 80s. He got called in from Molokai and all kinds of different places where they talked about seeing these crafts. Uncle saw this 50 years ago, and it landed in the valley there, and the people came out and had a drink of water, and so on and so forth. And so to bring the human side to the story, to take away the fear factor and say, well, heck, if you go visit somebody, are you going to be nice to them? Yeah, sure. Well, then we'll be nice back. And so just to add a little bit of principle to that. When you get to the older ones, I've got a nephew who's coming up on 17, and for many, many years, he is aware of my involvement. And when he was small, we used to go up to the mountains, Mount Palomar, and sometimes with people who had no idea what we were involved with. I've got many friends that haven't a clue, and I leave it that way. But we go up there in the evening, and since there is a very strong north-south polarity line after the Terminator moves by, sometimes you can see some crafts. And so we look at them and say, well, what do you think they are? They're moving in tandem and moving and revolving around each other and flying in formation and things like that. You open the door to that cognition. Now, they, of course, are more aware of the Star Trek, Star Wars kind of thing, and even that's not as bad as things like Alien and Armageddon and Terminator and all this other stuff that is designed to scare the holy hell out of everybody. So we have to then take that group and add some science to it. And that's the important part. Say, hey, listen, are you aware there's water on the moon? Are you aware they talked about water on Mars? Are you aware that the temperature gets as hot as 80 degrees? Are you aware that they're talking about some tree lines there along the Martian the Martian northern ice cap? And then see how their minds work with it and work with them. Sometimes you have to... The most difficult part of being a researcher and then presenting is learning how much to say and to whom. George used to say, I told you the truth, I just didn't tell you all of it. And that's true. We do that in our everyday lives. We have to become, to a certain extent, the intelligent filters of what we're going to say and whom to say it and how we say it. And not just slam everything on the table, boom, here it is like a buffet, figure it out for yourself. That help any?
Oh, that's, well, and then beyond, who do you give it to? You're older now, right? And maybe hopefully one of those young people took an interest. It's like this happened to you. You had this legacy come into your lap, so to speak. I mean, this is some other people a little bit older that I'm talking to. What do I do with this? It's rocking my world.
Well, yeah, you find some of those are susceptible and some who are totally closed door. Sometimes you're completely surprised by who comes and talks to you and for the reason why. I remember quite vividly in the late 80s, my father and I were in Honolulu, and a doctor and a couple of airline pilots arranged a home meeting up there in Honolulu, up at the hills overlooking the city. And we sat there and we had a discussion and talking. And there was one particular young fellow that was highly agitated and oscillated back between science fiction and this and that and what have you. And I learned from my father there the recognition of patience, because clearly, by the statements this young man made, he could have torn him to pieces, but he didn't do so. He let him talk, he let him express himself, and to get so-called it out of his system. And then rather than going back and individually peeling away all the pieces that weren't correct, he didn't believe in leaving people slammed down with no foundation anymore. And that's what would happen when you peel away everything. So all he did is he said, but I want you to think about this one thought. And with this one thought that he described to him, this fellow left clearly calmed down and thinking about the one thing that it would eventually lead him to unravel this thing for himself. And that is our responsibility in this field, to bring progression and understanding to our own fellow people. Because if we don't do that, then we might as well just close shop and forget about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. I have a couple little questions. We're about 9 minutes away from the end of the show. I was stuck with something you said when the astronauts were out in space, and they said that our craft, there were different spacecraft that followed them from Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space book. And you said sometimes they had music.
Yeah.
What kind of music was played?
Well, I'm not an astronaut, and I wasn't there at the time, so I can't particularly tell you. The only thing I can tell you is they say it is a very harmonious type of music.
Okay, they weren't hearing any kind of rock band or rap music?
No, it was very harmonious type of music. Having grown up old school, I've been exposed to, God knows, a whole lot of things. Classical music, rock, popular, what have you. Each one finds solace in their own particular kind. But there is some type of music that is composed that brings soothing to one's nerves and to one's thoughts. And I've always found some of that in classical, what happens to Schubert or Mozart or what have you. You can find the type of music that follows a type of melodious expression. And to some degree, this is the type of music that they participate in, and I'm sure they participate in a wide variety as well. But when you're dealing with circumstances, you want to bring the best of your connection along and not, once again, have mistakes or misinterpretations. And it's very important that we understand that there's a great deal of misinterpretation in this field. Telepathy is a picture language. Your animals use it with you all the time. Nature uses it with all the time. It has nothing to do with language or script. And George has a very good three-part series on telepathy that one of the universities, I believe in Minnesota, used it as part of one of their programs. And also, of course, the government was interested in it for their particular reasons. And so let us take some time and grasp at some tangible items that will make our life better on this world. That's what they come here and say, hey, listen, you can live better than you do. You can have greater understanding than you have. Why do you not wish to embrace that? A shuttle pilot once looked at the Adamski films and the way that their ability to maneuver 90 degrees at high velocities and things like that. And he said to me, Orange County, at a MUFON lecture I gave, he said, are they just doing this to make us look like idiots? And I said, absolutely not. What they're doing is they're showing us what we can achieve. And we are capable of doing and building the same time craft and maneuvering. And at the moment, we are locked into the phase of aerodynamics, where you have to have a wing and high and low pressure and acceleration by engines and burning of fossil fuels. We're in a rut in which we are using the same system for the last 70 years because of economics, which drives everything on this world. It drives us at an economic value to our lives, to each species, what is viable to survive and what does not, based upon whether we can put a penny value on something. And they're coming to show us there is more to life than that. For those who wish to embrace it, there it is, more is available. To a greater extent, most people do not want to embrace it anymore.
So did they discuss what type of, do they have an economic monetary system? How do they manage and govern their societies? Did they touch upon that with George?
They talk about a system very much like a system that we used to have with the Native American Indians, of which everybody contributes. In other words, you are producing based upon your particular talent. If one is an artist, they produce art. If another one produces mechanical devices, they do this. Another one's a farmer. Each one according to their particular talent, and that is made available to the entire society. It scares the hell out of us, but in a way that's called communalism or communism, which we never have practiced in its true state on this planet, even though we point the fingers at everybody. Because we believe that without competition and without free enterprise, people are essentially lazy. And in their societies, they don't have that. They have weeded out that laziness. You don't get there if you're lazy.
So they have like what Michael Tellinger talks about, contributionism.
Right, and they produce the very best product you can. In other words, you go to Sears and you see 20 types of refrigerators based upon how much money you could spend. They don't do that. They produce the very best that they can refrigerator, and there it is. Go and use it.
It is.
They produce the very best of tough transportation, and you just simply jump in it and go and use it. And these concepts are very difficult for most people.
Well, we've been talking about those type of things on our different radio shows, channels. Karen, we're almost out of time. You want to ask the last question?
Yes. What is the current situation and future of this fine organization? What can you tell us to be watching out for, to be coming out, etc.?
We have a republication called Behind the Flying Saucer Mystery. You'll see the cover on it on your web there. We probably have a little bit of slowdown here from the printer because of the holiday and Christmas coming up. I was hoping to get that out before Christmas, and it looks like it probably will be in the new year. And this particular book has taken George Adamski's third book, Flying Saucers Farewell, and it was republished as Behind the Flying Saucer Mysteries in the 70s, and we have added a whole new chapter to it, basically bringing people up to speed about George and what he talked about from his death in '65 through now, and a whole area of illustrations, letters and correspondence, newspaper articles from his world tours, an account of his interaction with Pope John the 23rd, in which he received the Golden Medallion for bringing a sealed message from the space people to Pope John, and all of that will come out in that book. And as far as the organization is concerned, we continue to make this information public. Some organizations like me to talk. Some of them are afraid of what I have to say, and I don't see why. It seems to be, pretty benign, but perhaps it doesn't mix with other things that they wish to promote. But either way, it should be an open forum for everyone. And so sometimes I will be on shows like this. I'm scheduled to be with Art Bell sometime in the near future as well for 3 hours. And we do the very best we can to educate and promote and make material available to people so that that we can somehow realign this terrible confusion factor that exists in this field. And like the space people have always said, we don't tell you what to think. We just hope that you think.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, and there were one more thing I want to clarify briefly. What did they exactly brief Eisenhower and Kennedy on? Like a quick note first.
George took Eisenhower to one of our military bases in which there was a arrangement of one of these ships to land there so that he could be briefed face-to-face, and the very same thing happened with John Kennedy as well.
Okay. And we have like 1 minute left. How do people contact you?
Well, they can email us. You'll notice there on the website we have a Facebook page, and pretty much this is, we open that up to everybody. I get a lot of people who want to be friends, and I try to make them available as fast as I can. I just don't spend my every waking second on the Internet, but they can go through that, and they can look at our website page, and that we have our email on there as well. And once again, I answer it as best I can due to the volume. And so that's how we do it. And then, of course, occasionally you'll see me like in Laughlin and other places, and hopefully back in Hawaii soon. And they can be more than happy to interact face-to-face with anybody.
And that's perfect timing. So thank you once again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I hope to do it again soon.